reproductive injustice in the age of capitalist austerity, because that's really more accurate. The state of abortion rights in the U.S. on January 22nd, which was yesterday, that's the 42nd anniversary of the Supreme Court decision legalizing abortion, Roe v. Wade. The situation for abortion rights is significantly worse than it was 4 years ago. The Guttmacher Institute issued a report the first week of this year that the states have passed 231 abortion restrictions in the last 4 years. And up to that time, there were maybe 100 that had been passed, or at the most 200, but 231 in 4 years. You will notice that that time period coincides with the economic fallout from the Great Recession, and there's no coincidence there. More than half the women of reproductive age, 15 to 44, in the U.S. live in states that are hostile or extremely hostile to abortion. The number of states Guttmacher rates as hostile in 2000 was 13. In 2014, 27 states are hostile, with 18 of those extremely hostile. 9 million poor women, 1 out of 7 women of childbearing age, who are eligible for Medicaid coverage, are denied coverage for abortions under the Hyde Amendment. But they do have coverage for other reproductive health care, including sterilizations. They are joined by millions of other poor women in 23 other states that voted not to expand Medicaid coverage under the Affordable Care Act. So who are the women who are suffering the most? The poor. Given the hostile restrictions passed by 27 states, things like limiting medical abortions, bans after 20 weeks of pregnancy, waiting periods, medically unnecessary procedures, and medically unnecessary requirements for abortion facilities. Millions of low-wage women workers, particularly women of color, young, immigrant, rural, and disabled women, many of whom are single mothers, do not have access to abortion, even though it is the law of the land. But let's expand our vision beyond abortion rights to reproductive justice. Reproductive justice is the concept that women's human rights, including all social, economic, political, cultural aspects of life, must be acknowledged and honored in law and in practice. That means that the vast majority of women in this country do not have the quality of life they deserve. Only the richest women, whose rights are not bound by what money can buy, have that luxury, even though they may be otherwise bound by patriarchal obligations. The promise of Roe v. Wade, envisioned by millions of young women who fought in the streets for legal abortion in the early 70s, and I see many of such women in the room, was to expand women's right to control our bodies, to allow us to decide whether to have or not have children, and to help us achieve equality in all aspects of life. That goal is now but a distant memory for those of us who fought for it, and not even a shadow of a reality for the vast majority of poor and working women. Given the increasing inequality between those who work for wages and those who own the richest Croesus corporations, it's no wonder white women are still making 77% of what white men make, while women of color make even less than what black and brown men make. The bosses are only too eager to buy Republican Party shills to impose austerity on working people and the oppressed. The primary cudgel Congress has over women, besides denying them equal pay, is limiting abortion rights and access to contraception. Interestingly, the rate of abortion has declined by 13% between 2002 and 2011, principally due to better long-term methods of birth control. In fact, the rate of abortion is now at an all-time low. In their first 3 days in office, the new Republican-controlled House of Representatives introduced 5 anti-abortion bills. The keystone of their anti-choice agenda is a federal ban on abortions after 20 weeks of pregnancy, the so-called, quote, I'm not kidding on this title, Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. You got that? Otherwise known as H.R. 36, and the House passed that in 2013. In other words, anti-abortion groups claim that the fetus can feel pain at 20 weeks, and that's why they are imposing this ban. However, all the major medical associations do not believe this is in any way physically possible for the fetus's development at 20 weeks. But they don't care about science. They just care about their own perceptions. Already 14 states have 20-week bans on the books. With new Republican-controlled state legislatures, more are sure to follow, with many other restrictions. 20-week bans are troublesome for 2 reasons. 1, women at risk for fetal abnormalities often get the results of amniocentesis and other genetic tests around that time or even later, which would completely prevent them from having an abortion if the fetus turned out to be really badly formed. Second, such a ban would conflict with the second trimester limit of 24 weeks set by Roe v. Wade, which is the time when a fetus can live independently. Passage of such a federal ban is a direct challenge to Roe, which is exactly what the right wing and their corporate puppet masters want, even though it would surely not be passed by the Senate, and President Obama has promised to veto it. However, plans for passing the ban on January 22nd as a slap in the face to pro-choice advocates and to rally the anti-abortion troops who turn out to denounce the anniversary were abruptly halted when 2 Republican congresswomen pulled their support for it on Tuesday and rallied another 25 congresswomen to join them. This led to an internal split in the Republican caucus. The congresswomen feared, probably looking ahead to 2016, that a very narrow exception for rape and incest victims would alienate women voters. You better believe it. As H.R. 36 is written, victims of sexual assault or incest could only claim an exemption to the ban if they reported the incident to the police, even though this is very rare for rape or incest victims to make an official report. Talks took place all day Wednesday. The Republican caucus was worried there would be political fallout if they held a vote on the ban without support from a large number of Republican women. So at the 11th hour, they pulled the ban and substituted H.R. 7, or the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act, another measure that had passed the House last year. And let me give you a little history about that No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act. Under the Hyde Amendment, which I mentioned before, federal funds are already prohibited from financing abortion for poor women on Medicaid. But H.R. 7 goes far beyond that, banning plans in the Affordable Care Act's new state-level marketplaces for covering abortion, as well as requiring small businesses to pay additional taxes if they offer employees plans that cover abortion. So this would effectively cut off poor women's access to abortion by making it too expensive for them to award. A number of pro-choice groups have protested the passage of this bill, which did take place yesterday on the 22nd. Said Jessica Gonzalez Rojas, the executive director of the National Latina Institute for Reproductive Health, they couldn't sell a ban on later abortions. So instead, under the cover of night, they are targeting low-income women. Why is it more acceptable to go after those who are struggling financially? Shame on them. Eventually, the hodgepodge of conflicting regulations passed by the states will eventually be appealed to the Supreme Court. The court would be asked to rule on whether a state has created a, quote, undue burden on a woman seeking abortion. For instance, it's been estimated that a poor woman living in the Rio Grande region of Texas would have to spend more than $1,000, upwards of $2,000, to get an abortion if clinics in that area were shuttered. She'd have to pay for child care, a hotel, food, transportation, gas, you name it. Confusion abounds with the conflicting state laws. Here's an example. On January 7th, the case questioning the legality of Texas's anti-abortion law were heard by the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. One plank of the law requiring doctors to have admitting privileges at a nearby hospital was ruled constitutional by one panel of judges when the state had more than 20 clinics, including those in the Rio Grande area. But another panel of judges in the same circuit blocked a similar law in Mississippi when finding it constitutional would have shut the only clinic in the state. However, there are a few glimmers of hope, as the progressive wing of the women's health and rights movement has begun to coalesce locally and nationally. The Women's Health Protection Act, which would negate state laws, completely supersede them, was introduced into Congress last year with 166 congressional co-sponsors and more than 300,000 grassroots supporters. In July of 2013, a group called All Above All was launched by reproductive justice, health, youth, and rights organizations. It's run by women ages 18 to 30 and people of color. Its purpose is to completely overturn the Hyde Amendment, thus ending the situation that stopped funding for Medicaid abortions. But much more is urgently needed. There has not been a national demonstration affirming women's right to choose in Washington, D.C. since 2004. Even though national mobilizations can cost millions of dollars, just setting a date and issuing a strong, united call, as organizers in Ferguson, Missouri have, to motivate activism around Black Lives Matter, might be enough to initiate a demonstration in D.C. and elsewhere around the country. As the movie Selma shows, and as we know only too well from our recent many demonstrations in the streets, protests matter. It's time to take to the streets to demand reproductive justice for all women. You can take pills that are called mifepristone in the early weeks of a pregnancy, 4 to 7 weeks of pregnancy, so that you don't have to go through surgery. And what they're doing is they're trying to regulate it so that you have to, instead of just calling a doctor, getting the pills prescribed through your pharmacy, you have to go to the doctor, you have to have several appointments with the doctor to receive the pills and then do follow-up care, and it's totally unnecessary and just boondoggles, you know, all the administrative stuff is just a pain in the ass. Okay. I want to answer Matchis's question because, I mean, the answer is simple. The ruling class, the Koch brothers, and all the folks like them who use Catholic ideology to be behind the right to life, in many cases don't give a damn about working and oppressed people. They could care less what the repercussions are because they believe in the principle of, you know, that abortion is evil. Well, bullshit.
Well, they support the death penalty.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. You know, and you just have to be aware that this ideology does not make sense in any kind of compassionate or humane society, and the fact that they are trying to impose a set of ideology on the vast majority of people when poll after poll shows that about 70% of the country supports women's rights to have an abortion and to control her own life. I mean, it shows what a manipulative machination it is to try to control women and families. And Shelley's absolutely right. It's not just women. We're talking about families. We're talking about communities. And one of the things that spurs me on is knowing that there's someone like Sarah Benjamin in Baltimore who has a 5-year-old who has not been stopped by the struggle, but has only gotten stronger because she sees what is happening. I just want to respond to what Dolores asked. I read the statistic that 80% of the people in Congress are male, and most of them are white. So that means 20% are women. There are about 500 people, give or take a few, in Congress. So that means approximately 100 of them are women. And there are 100, so if you lop off 100 for the Senate, that means that a quarter of those people in the House are women. So having 25 out of 100 women saying we're not going to support this bill is a big deal. And what amazes me is that it got this far before anybody objected to it. And I just can't help but thinking, I just read a thing that in the Virginia state legislature, there was, which is Republican controlled, there was a health committee meeting, and there are 17 members in the health committee, and something like about 13 out of the 17 voted to put restrictive controls on what kind of contraceptives women could have access to under the Affordable Care Act. I mean, why? Trying to limit women's access to contraception? I mean, it's just so obvious. And it was all men. So there are those in the bourgeois movement who would say, well, let's elect more women. But that's not the answer, we know that, because it's got to be, unless they're working class women, women of color, women who know what they're doing. And remember also, Congress is a select club of millionaires. So we know they're not going to vote in our interests. So I'm really glad we've had such a good, wide-ranging discussion of these issues tonight. Thanks.